Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Civic Math. Today, we arrive at one of the most influential colonies in American history, Massachusetts. When most people think about the American Revolution, they think about Boston, the Boston Tea Party, Paul Revere, Lexington, Concord, and the first shots of the war. But before Massachusetts became the center of the revolution, it was a colony filled with farmers, fishermen, merchants, shipbuilders, and ordinary families trying to make a living. Today, we are going to explore Massachusetts through mathematics. We'll explain the population, look at the economy, the geography, and why this colony became the place where resistance to Britain grew stronger than anywhere else. So grab your calculator and let's see how Massachusetts helped change history. We are going to examine Massachusetts through um, seven sections. Okay. In section one, okay, we are going to cover the size of Massachusetts. Okay. In 1776, Massachusetts was one of the largest colonies in North America. Historians estimate that Massachusetts had a population of about 378,000 people. Virginia had about 538,000. Pennsylvania had about 434,000. Connecticut had about 249,000. Georgia had about 33,000. Okay, so Virginia was large, Pennsylvania was also large, but Massachusetts ranked among the largest and most influential colonies in North America. What was the percentage of that colonial population that lived in Massachusetts? Okay, um, colonial America, 2.5 million people. Massachusetts, 378,000 people. So here the math, 378,000 divided by 2.5 million, we think about 0.1512, or about roughly 15.1% of the population lived in Massachusetts at that time. Okay, so that's roughly 1 out of every 7 Americans lived in Massachusetts. Okay, in section 2, let's examine the city of Boston itself, which was one of the most important colonial cities in colonial America. So Boston uh, had a population of about 16,000 people. Okay, so 16,000 people divided by 378,000, you're looking at 0.042. So that's about roughly 4.2% of the population in Massachusetts lived in Boston. Okay, so that's really 4 out of every 100 people lived in Boston. Okay, this means that more than 95% of people in Massachusetts lived in rural areas, small towns, villages, farms, and fishing communities. Okay, Boston may have been the political center, but Massachusetts was still largely rural. Okay, In section 3, let's examine the timeline. How old was Massachusetts in 1776? So the timeline is this. The Pilgrims is accepted that arrived in Massachusetts in 1620. Okay, the Pilgrims arrived in Plymouth. Okay. Boston was founded in 1630. Okay. In 1776, Declaration of Independence. Okay, so from 1776 to, let's say, from 1620 to 1776, 1620, so that's about 150 years. Okay, so that means Massachusetts existed more than a century and a half before independence was even considered. Okay, now for comparison, the US will turn 250 years July 2026. Boston, the people of Massachusetts in 1776 were already living in communities that had existed for generations. Okay? So in section 4, what did Massachusetts produce? Okay. Unlike Virginia, Massachusetts was not dominated by tobacco plantations. Its economy was more diversified. People earned a living through fishing, shipbuilding, trade, farming, manufacturing, and most importantly, commerce. The fishing industry specifically was very important. New England fishermen harvested enormous quantities of cod. Much of that fish was exported around the Atlantic world. So suppose a fishing vessel catches 10 tons of cod. Okay? And if Boston receives 50 of those, so you're looking at about 500 tons of cod. Okay. Now imagine dozens of ships arriving throughout the year. You'll begin to understand why fishing became one of the economic engines of Massachusetts. Okay. Fishing meant trade, meant income. Ships meant jobs. Trade meant taxes, and taxes meant conflict with Britain. This is where mathematics begin to connect directly to politics. Okay. On that, let's jump to section 5. Okay. Why were taxes such a big issue? Okay. Massachusetts merchants depended on trade. Every new British tax affected their business. The colonists objected to measures such as the Stamp Act, the Townshend Act, and the tea tax, which is the one that most people are very, very familiar with. Okay. The issue was not simply the amount of money. It was who had the authority to impose taxes. The famous colonial argument became no taxation without representation. Suppose a merchant earns 100 pounds. A new tax cost him £5. What percentage has he lost? 5%. Now imagine that tax being imposed repeatedly on different goods. The economic impact begins to grow. Massachusetts merchants believed these decisions should not be made by a parliament located thousands of miles away. So that puts us into the distance. In section 6, we are going to examine the distance between London and Boston. The people making decisions often lived far away from the people affected by these decisions. Boston was 3,200 miles from London. Okay? Imagine sending a letter to travel that distance. Travel by sailing ship could take weeks. A response could take months. How can a government effectively govern people thousands of miles away when communication is so slow? That was one of the great political questions of the 18th century, and Massachusetts found itself at the center of that debate. Okay? So in section 7, why Massachusetts mattered. Okay? It had a large population. It has a busy port. It has strong local governments. It had active newspapers, influential merchants, and most importantly, it had a highly educated political leaders. So when protests began in Massachusetts, people throughout the colonies paid attention. The events that happened here would soon influence all 13 colonies. Massachusetts became the spark, but a spark alone does not create a revolution. That spark had to spread. And in our next episode, we'll examine the events and people that transformed Massachusetts from a colony of protest into the birthplace of a revolution. If you like or enjoy this episode, please like, subscribe, and share it with one person. We'll see you in part 2.